Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. So today we have some pretty bizarre Star Wars drama. As you're probably aware, and I spoke about this a couple of days ago, George Lucas just made his very first ever appearance at San Diego Comic-Con. It was a great day to be a Star Wars fan. George was there to promote his upcoming Museum of Narrative Art. He spoke about the importance of preserving art, the importance of mythology and storytelling, and even though he didn't specifically talk about Star Wars, it was a great day because we got to see him on stage. 6,000 people showed up to just bask in his presence. And in my video on the subject, I analysed his main quote about what art means to him. But two separate controversies have emerged from that comment. The first is in regards to George saying he's not the kind of person who would sell a valuable piece of art if it appreciates. And Star Wars fans have been jumping on this, saying his words are a bit hypocritical because at the end of the day, he sold Star Wars, his whole legacy, the most valuable piece of art. And I guess there are a few different ways you can interpret his quote. There are those who say George is hinting that he regrets selling Lucasfilm back in 2012. We know he's not been too happy with everything Disney's done with the brand, and maybe in retrospect, now that the years are passing by and the prequel trilogy hate is long behind us, he wouldn't have sold Star Wars. And he sold it for three main reasons. The first is a human reason. He wanted to spend more time with his kids. He figured his age would prevent him from making the sequel trilogy, so he wanted to leave Star Wars in capable hands. Bob Iger for years had been pushing and trying to convince him, and in the end, he got inside George's head. We'll talk about this more later in the video. Another popular opinion that's emerged is that George wasn't necessarily talking about the Star Wars franchise in this quote. He was talking about the specifics of what his museum was going to contain. But it still begs the question, did he have Star Wars on his mind? And this brings us on to the second controversy. This one concerns the question of what is art, and his interpretation puts such a great emphasis on personal connection. What the piece of art means to you, it's not about what the critics might say, it's about the personal connection that the creator has to it and the way an audience engages with it. Now, I'm not going to repeat everything I said in that video, but in essence, George's message was, if you enjoy and believe in a piece of art, don't let anyone persuade you otherwise. If you believe in what you're creating, a book, a film, a poem, a painting, if that means something to you as a creator, or conversely, if you enjoy it as a consumer, don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Because for George, art is an intimate experience. In many ways, it's a deeply human endeavor, and it shouldn't be gatekept, because art is an alchemy of experience, emotion, imagination, and even family. Those in attendance said they came away feeling really invigorated. But in the video I made, I did posit that a lot of what George is saying can be perceived as the antithesis of the approach taken by Lucasfilm under Disney. Not that he was saying this, but it is a great example of recent shortcomings. How with Disney executives, the focus is on budgets, output and quantity, the amount of releases, how the focus of the studio doesn't always prioritize a good story. And that's a key reason why many Star Wars fans have kind of moved away from the franchise and said, this just doesn't feel like Star Wars anymore to me. But here's where things get interesting. It's a relevant and valid talking point. However, George Lucas was not specifically talking about Disney Star Wars. And the only reason I'm saying this is I've noticed in certain articles and headlines, the context of what he was talking about has been removed. And I've been seeing so many sensationalized posts and quotes claiming that George was calling out Kathleen Kennedy. And while it might be fair to say he might be thinking some of those things, he was critical about the sequel trilogy, he certainly called out Disney in the past. He wasn't referring to Kathleen Kennedy in this quote. And I'll be the first to put my hand up and say, I vehemently disagree with the way Kathy's handled Lucasfilm. Between overpromising and under-delivering on projects like Obi-Wan Kenobi, which she originally called the rematch of the century, to indefinite delays, film cancellations, you name it, with a few exceptions like Andor, it's been a pretty tough few years for Star Wars fans. But we have to be fair and honest in our reporting. I know it's the worst time to say this because fake news is rampant, but to frame George's quote as a direct call out of Disney or Lucasfilm, even if he does think those things and is being covert, I don't think he would appreciate the twisting of his words, especially when he was talking about something that means so much to him, the preservation of art and how it relates to society. He was reminiscing about the filmmaking process and the importance of where you put your priorities. Ironically, just like art, As fans listening to George, it's upon us to interpret his words, to agree with them, to disagree with them, or like I said the other day, you can absolutely take his words and compare his approach to the likes of creatives under Disney, but to claim that George was calling them out is just not true. Like I said, I'm sure he thinks those things, and his comments about budget absolutely ring true for recent Star Wars projects like The Acolyte, even Skeleton Crew and Andor, but I guess that was George's biggest criticism about studio overreach, prioritizing money over art. So whether or not he had Disney Star Wars in mind, it is relevant, but the idea of there being some kind of fictitious war between Kathy and George just isn't true. Do I think he feels betrayed by Kathy? Yeah, maybe. He famously said, the first 6 movies, episodes 1 to 6, the original trilogy and prequels are his. Same with the Clone Wars. But everything else, the sequel trilogy and the new shows, those are separate from his vision. Even if Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau give him a call to ask for his advice. I don't think George is as attached to the Star Wars brand as he once was. The first 6 films will always be his creative babies. But I get the impression that he's probably moved on from a lot of those early frustrations after Disney bought Lucasfilm. Because he did say he was annoyed they didn't use his sequel trilogy treatments, he found The Force Awakens way too derivative of A New Hope. Some people say the only complimentary thing he said about The Last Jedi is that it looks good. So I'm not denying that George disagrees with the way Star Wars has turned out. But then again, he enjoyed the Kenobi show, he enjoyed Rogue One, plenty of fans theorize he probably enjoys Andor, but at his age, with everything he's gone through, with the years that have passed, I'm sure in many ways he's moved on. I think it was in an interview just before the Ahsoka show that Dave Filoni said, George still watches Star Wars and the Disney Plus shows, but he's more detached. It's more out of morbid curiosity. But this notion that he was taking a dig at Kathy, that he was genuinely venomous the other day, I don't think anyone in the room would agree. And I think the main contention with her, other than the obvious and the numerous frustrations over the last few years, is an interview she gave back in June. When she was in London, she hosted a screening of the original version of Star Wars from 1977, the despecialized edition, and in the interview she teased the future of Star Wars, saying that there's going to be a focus on standalone stories and how those don't have to connect to the wider Skywalker saga. But she worded one sentence a certain way, and some fans think that George Lucas was reacting to it. Like I said, I don't think George cares enough to read about every little bit of Star Wars news, and I doubt very much he's specifically addressing this. Kathy said, I really think that now we're in a position where it's broadened the possibility of stories and filmmakers that we can bring in to tell stories that mean something to them. It doesn't necessarily have to connect to every little thing that's been done in Star Wars. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Kathleen Kennedy, but I think it's a good idea to move beyond the scope of known characters because there is so much potential in the unexplored. Future timelines, the distant past going back to Dawn of the Jedi, there's a lot of great things they can do, especially if they're not tied down by episodes 1 to 9 and the Skywalkers. But it's the fact she says she wants to bring in new filmmakers that some fans take issue with. They think that when George said it's not about the celebrities, that he was referring to Kathleen Kennedy's comments on new filmmakers. I don't see the link. George was talking about actors and budgets, 2 points which do apply to Disney Star Wars, but definitely not this comment from Kathy. When she says new filmmakers, it's extremely vague. She didn't say famous celebrity filmmakers or huge names, so I don't personally see the link. If anything, Kathy's statement, which I do take with a pinch of salt, does actually align with George in this instance, because she says, filmmakers we can bring in to tell stories that mean something to them. So again, the personal aspect, something which George literally just said is the heart of an artist, the personal connection. Obviously that is very vague and things do go wrong in those instances when you're not serving the story. But George did make a point about the artist and what they believe in. Tony Gilroy did that with Andor. I don't think we need to muddy the waters or poison the well just to put forward a point that we want to be true. And I have given a million disclaimers in this video saying, I think Star Wars deserves better than what we've gotten. Generally speaking, in the pop culture zeitgeist, Star Wars is in a bad place. I think the studio of Lucasfilm needs a revamp, a new creative approach. I don't think the current model is working. But in my opinion, all of this nonsense jibber-jabber is no different to the rumors of an internal civil war between Kathy, Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. It was never true. But what do you guys think? And do you think it's Star Wars' best approach to focus on standalones? Let me know in the comments down below.